She climbed the steps one by one. Only 22 years old, dressed in white like it was her wedding day. Her hair pulled back neatly. The crowd around her was silent, thousands of eyes watching, but no one speaking. And at the top of the platform, the blade was already waiting. The date was September 11, 1599. The city was Rome, and the young woman walking toward her death was Beatrice Cenci, noble, brilliant, and heartbreakingly beautiful. But that didn't save her, because in this story, beauty wasn't a gift, it was a curse. And the real crime wasn't treason, wasn't theft. It was daring to defy a monster. See, this isn't your typical historical tale filled with wars or politics. This is the kind of story that hits you in the chest. It's about silence, about power, about what happens when a woman is born into the wrong house at the wrong time, and the world decides her existence is just too inconvenient. Let's rewind the clock. Beatrice was born in 1577, into the powerful and aristocratic Saint Jose. They were rich, filthy rich. Their home was practically a fortress, all marble and frescoes and gilded ceilings. But the beauty of that mansion masked something horrifying. Her father, Francesco Cenci, was one of the most feared men in Rome. Not just by outsiders, his own staff was terrified of him. Even the church, even the Pope himself, knew he was dangerous. But nobody did a thing. Why? Because money talks, and power protects its own. Francesco wasn't just a bad father. He was obsessed, and not in the overprotective dad kind of way. This was darker, sicker. Beatrice wasn't his daughter in his eyes. She was property, something to own, something to control. She grew up in isolation. Sure, she had jewels, fine fabrics, expensive tutors, but she was a prisoner in her own home. Francesco didn't let her meet anyone, especially not men, because he couldn't stand the thought of anyone else having her, not even in marriage. And when Beatrice hit her mid-teens, things turned even more disturbing. He began entering her room without warning, watching her while she dressed, making cruel comments about her body. And when she tried to resist, he silenced her. Every single time. The staff whispered, neighbors guessed, but no one dared speak openly. You didn't cross Francesco Cenci. You just kept your head down and prayed you weren't next. Beatrice was desperate. She wrote secret letters to distant relatives. She begged her maid to smuggle notes outside the palace walls. But who would believe her? She was just a girl. He was one of the most powerful men in the city, and in 16th century Rome, daughters had no voice, no rights, no protection. When Francesco finally agreed to let her marry, it wasn't out of love, it was strategy. He wanted someone who wouldn't ask questions, someone he could manipulate, someone who'd let him keep Beatrice close, too close, even after she became someone's wife. But here's where everything shifted. At the family's country estate, Beatrice met a young man named Olimpio Calvetti. He was a soldier, rough around the edges, sure, but kind, respectful, human. And he saw Beatrice not as an object, but as a woman worth saving. They started meeting in secret, late nights, whispered conversations, hidden letters. For the first time in her life she felt seen, loved, and hopeful. Olimpio promised to help her escape, to take her far from the marble prison her father kept her in. But hope is dangerous when you're trapped by someone like Francesco. Because of course he found out, and when he did, everything got worse. He fired Olimpio on the spot, locked Beatrice in her room, put guards on her door, and the punishments, they escalated into something no one should endure. That's when the idea was born. It wasn't just about freedom anymore. It was survival. Beatrice, along with her stepmother Lucrezia and her brother Giacomo, began to plan. They would end this, one way or another. The plot was simple. During a trip to their rural castle, far from the prying eyes of Rome, they would have Francesco killed. They'd make it look like an accident. Maybe a fall from a high balcony. No one would dig too deep. Francesco had made plenty of enemies. So in September of 1598, it happened. Two men entered Francesco's room in the dead of night. He tried to scream, but never got the chance. Within minutes, the man who had terrorized his own family was gone, dead. But the nightmare wasn't over, not even close. You'd think the worst part was over, right? That the monster was dead, and Beatrice could finally breathe. But in Rome, especially 16th century Rome, freedom wasn't something you earned by surviving. Especially not if you were young, noble, and beautiful. The murder of Francesco Cenci should have been a closed case. He had enemies all over Rome. He owed money, had political beefs, and no shortage of rivals who wanted him gone. Realistically, anyone could have done it. But the Pope? He needed someone to blame, someone public, someone symbolic. And Beatrice? She was perfect for it. Why her? Because she wasn't just the daughter of Francesco Cenci. She was a young woman who had dared to step out of line. She was beautiful, and back then that alone made her suspicious. And above all, she represented something dangerous to the powers that be. A woman who had taken matters into her own hands. So the investigation kicked off, and it was brutal. They didn't search for truth, they hunted for a confession. Servants were tortured until they said exactly what the church wanted to hear. Anyone who hesitated was whipped, starved, or worse. No rules, no fairness, just fear. By the time they got to Beatrice, they didn't need evidence. The narrative was already built. She was the mastermind, the seductress, the symbol of rebellion that needed to be crushed. So they threw her into a cell, along with her stepmother, her brother, and even the family's youngest son. Beatrice spent months in that dark, wet dungeon, waiting for a trial she knew was a joke. The Vatican had already made up its mind. Pope Clement VIII wanted an example, something dramatic to remind all of Rome that even the rich couldn't escape the law. Especially not women like her. When the trial finally started, it wasn't a trial. It was theater. Beatrice stood in court and told the truth. She described the abuse, the isolation, the things her father had done, the things he'd said. She laid it all out. Raw, honest. They only cared about confirming what the Pope wanted, a guilty verdict, and they got it. The sentence was devastating. Beatrice would be executed publicly, by beheading. At just 22 years old, she would lose everything. Her brother Giacomo, tortured to death before being killed. Her stepmother, also condemned. Only the youngest boy was spared, and only because he was too young to execute. But something strange happened in the days leading up to the execution. Rome pushed back. Nobles, merchants, even priests started pleading for mercy. People from every corner of the city said the same thing. This punishment doesn't fit the crime. Beatrice had already suffered more than most could imagine. Killing her wouldn't bring justice. It would only add more blood to an already tragic story. But Pope Clement VIII didn't budge. In fact, the more people rallied around Beatrice, the more determined he became. He couldn't risk a martyr. He couldn't let a criminal become a legend. The church was built on obedience, and Beatrice had defied that too boldly, too publicly. So the execution would go forward. September 11, 1599. The bridge near Castel Sant'Angelo was packed. Thousands of people gathered, some curious, some grieving, many hoping against hope that a last-minute pardon would arrive. But it never came. Beatrice emerged, dressed in white, calm, composed, not weeping, not begging, just steady. She looked like a bride walking toward the altar. Her hair was tied back. Her eyes didn't flinch. And that, more than anything, shook the crowd. Even the executioner hesitated. His hands reportedly trembled. It said he asked if he really had to do it. But the answer was yes. He raised the blade. The crowd held its breath. And with a single swing, Beatrice was gone. The silence that followed Beatrice's execution was unlike anything Rome had ever seen. No applause, no jeering, just an overwhelming stillness. It was as if the entire city realized, at the same time, that something had gone terribly wrong. That they hadn't just witnessed justice. They had watched a sacrifice. And over the next few days, flowers started appearing at the site where the scaffold once stood. No one claimed them. No one had to. Everyone knew who they were for. Beatrice Cenci had become more than just a name. She had become a symbol. But even now, centuries later, people still ask, was she guilty? Did she really plan her father's murder? Did she arrange it? Or did she simply know and stay silent? The historical records don't offer a clear answer. The confessions were pulled under torture. The trials were rigged. The politics were loud. And the truth? It got buried under everything else. What we do know is this: Francesco Cenci was a monster. That's not speculation. It's documented. He abused his children, manipulated the system, and ruled his family with fear. He wasn't just stripped, not just the tragedy, but the question: what happens when a woman is cornered by power, silenced by tradition, and left with no legal escape? And maybe the more disturbing truth is, we're still asking that question today. Because 400 years later, stories like Beatrice's still echo around the world. Women are still punished for being beautiful, as if their appearance invites danger. They're still doubted when they speak out, still told to endure, still forced to make impossible choices between survival and silence. The systems may look different, but the judgment, it hasn't evolved nearly enough. And it's not just about one courtroom. It's about what happens in the quiet moments. The disbelief, the rumors, the way we turn victims into villains with just a whisper. Beatrice didn't die because she was evil. She died because she was inconvenient. Because she didn't fit into the story powerful men wanted to tell. Her beauty made her noticeable. Her strength made her dangerous. And her courage made her unforgettable. So yes, poets wrote about her. Painters captured her haunting grace. Writers turned her into legend. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the real legacy is how she forced an entire society to confront its own reflection, and didn't blink. Because when she knelt before the executioner, she wasn't just accepting her fate. She was exposing a truth bigger than herself. That in a world where men hold all the power, the most dangerous thing a woman can do is fight back. Beatrice Cenci was not a saint. She was not a revolutionary. She didn't lead armies or draft laws. But what she did, what she was able to expect, was enough to threaten the entire foundation of Rome's patriarchal power. And that's why she had to die. Not for murder, not for rebellion, but for daring to say, I deserve to be free. Her story traveled far beyond Rome, across Europe, across centuries, and if you listen closely, it still speaks. It reminds us that injustice isn't always loud. Sometimes it wears silk and gold and whispers behind palace doors. And sometimes justice doesn't look like scales or gavels. It looks like a woman in white, walking toward a blade with her head held high. So the next time someone asks who Beatrice Cenci was, tell them she was never just a victim or just a criminal. She was a mirror, a warning, a name we still speak, because silence only wins when we let it.